When my review of a pony's sympathy dropped, one commenter pointed out what at surface level appears to be a contradiction, that being how I said pay attention to all criticism only to dismiss someone else's feedback as idiotic. The thing is though, there are a lot of critical voices out there and it would be impossible to follow every one of them since so many of them contradict each other. There does come a point where you have to just fold your arms and say, I've considered it, but no. The question is, how, as a novice or indeed a writer of any level, do you judge what is worth taking on board and what is not? I'm afraid there is no easy answer, but that's what I'm here to help with today. One redundant criticism that gets treaded out a lot is X character or MacGuffin being used as a plot device. That always confused me, since surely every element of a story exists to serve the plot in some way. I believe this is another one of those cases where those making the argument simply lack the capability to critically articulate the issue they are actually getting at. That issue usually being poor setup, which leads to the author's hand being visible. If your protagonist is going to use their interest in the occult to summon a super demon leading into the climax of the third act, you'd better establish or at least strongly hint at that interest from the beginning. A plot device is like a crop, you can't harvest it unless you've already planted the seed. This is why good character design is all about working backwards. Every detail about them should be geared towards where they are going. To pretentiously coin a phrase, I like to think of it as writing in the fourth dimension. It's a technique that can get others thinking you are a writing genius when in fact you are just making stuff up as you're going along. See, storytelling doesn't have to be this overly complicated, laborious process, and making it as such can actually mislead beginners to the craft. Sure, it is good to know your characters well and what makes them tick and what motivates them, but I remember this exercise we were made to do when I was studying creative writing, where you had to write about what your character's shopping list would be. I never much enjoyed this task, partly because I'm hopeless when it comes to being put on the spot, but also I think some part of me recognised that the only time it's ever worth knowing your character's shopping list is if you plan on having that character go shopping. There is this argument for putting needless superficial detail into something because it makes the world more immersive. However, in practice it just serves to weigh down the pacing as we are left bored and wondering at what stage that paragraph about the protagonist's house being a bungalow with a converted loft is going to become relevant to anything. Of course, there are some surface details you can't avoid describing, like the protagonist's gender, ethnicity or hair colour, as they are the audience's window into the story. That said, getting that sort of information across is just about the easiest thing you have to do as a writer, but if you're still having trouble, Lily did quite a comprehensive video on it which I recommend. If your character's cousin is a talented unicorn and that makes them envious, so they design technology to cybernetically enhance the other pony races in order to level the playing field, well that's different, as it directly ties to a motivation which in turn leads to a payoff. It's all one long plot device really, but no pony knows, except writers. Keep in mind those motivations need not necessarily be the most savoury, even if it's a main character whom we are supposed to be rooting for. There is this misconception going around that a protagonist must not have any major flaws, when in reality they need not even be all that likeable. For a mainstream example, take the titular character of Deadpool. Do all those crude references to masturbation and so on really make him likeable? No, they don't, but it's sure as hell entertaining, and as we get to know what is at stake for this character, we become invested in them. We touched on this idea briefly in the last review, but the hysteria over characters showing the slightest flaws tends to come hoof in hoof with the crusade against Mary Sue's. That is because they are both rooted in the same underlying philosophy that characters must be relatable, just an ordinary pony like you or I. Now, there is some truth to that, your protagonist should be relatable in some aspects, but if you take this approach to its extreme, you'll just end up with boring characters who do boring things with no imperfections or anything remarkable about them at all. And I'll take witty and entertaining over boring any day. The MLP writing staff know this only too well, indeed they remind us on a regular basis how flawed their characters are, in spite of whatever backlash it inevitably causes. I think I can finally see what Fame and Misfortune was getting at and appreciate it on a new level.
My character? We are real ponies. This journal is a record of things that actually happened to us.
Nah, that episode is still a mess, but after witnessing the recent reaction to non-compete clause, I will concede there is some validity to the "we're not flawless" rebuttal. Many of those who can't comprehend that a well-written Alicorn space warrior can still be relatable, unsurprisingly also lack the critical nuance to recognise characters will behave differently in exceptional situations. If, for example, they are under extreme stress, racing against time to prevent the apocalypse, of course they are going to make some questionable decisions in their desperation. Finally, character flaws allow for growth. A self-centered protagonist can learn to be more selfless, an arrogant one more humble. Fluttershy could never have grown to be assertive if she hadn't started out as timid and unsure of herself. If you begin with perfection, where can you go from there? Hopefully this has cleared things up a little. If there's one piece of advice you should take away from this, it's just be interesting. Reading and writing is all about escapism first and foremost, after all, not shopping lists or relatability. I'm Midnight and I just lost my train of thought. If you enjoyed watching this, then you should like and subscribe, as it helps support me, and more importantly, you'll get notified when I release a future video. Well, you might do, if you get lucky.